Hi, have you ever thought of the idea of infinity? Like maybe you discussed it in math or physics class or something like that, or maybe, just thought of it on your own. Do you actually think it's possible? Because basically, I don't. I'm pretty convinced that infinity is simply not possible, and that in fact all these physicists that believe that, that infinity can actually exist, and that the universe actually, for instance, could be, infinite, or that, there could be a multiverse which is infinite. To me, I think that's actually impossible. And that means also that, of course, so spatial infinity is impossible, but also material infinity. So you can't have an infinity of, objects or an infinity of time. So they can't be an infinite past or an infinite future. And so the reason I'm saying this partly is just kind of intuitive. I mean, to a large extent, it's just intuitive, and there's not really any way I can prove it. I mean, it's more like something that you have to sort of get and understand axiomatically. The way I think of it is just you try to visualize it, and you try to visualize something going out, extending out into space forever, or extending backwards or forwards in time forever, and just asking yourself, is that really possible? So okay, then you might say, okay, but in that case, if it doesn't extend infinitely, then there must be a boundary, right? Well, not necessarily, because it could be circular. That's certainly a hypothesis for space, is that actually you keep going, and in the end you actually end up coming back this way you came, just like on Earth, where you're actually on a sphere, and you just walk, and in the end, if you just keep walking in a straight line, you actually end up where you started from, right? That's how it works on Earth, because it looks like two-dimensional, the surface of the Earth, but it's actually folded over into a ball in the 3D space. So there's this idea that actually the universe might be like that this 3Ds, instead of being 2D folded into a ball in 3D, well, it's a 3D structure that's folded into a ball in 4D. And so you could just potentially just go straight out in space, and then eventually you'd end up coming back where you came from. So that would imply a curved universe, and apparently that even if the universe is curved, the curves have to be, it seems at least, that the curves would have to be very large, much larger than the observable universe, which means that the actual universe would be even much larger than the observable universe. However, it still hasn't been ruled out that the universe is curved, and it's also possible to have a finite and boundless universe, even if the universe isn't curved, and that could be, for instance, if it's in a 4D equivalent of a donut shape. Now the idea, so think about it, if you just go back forever in time, then, and if it's infinite, well, one of the classic arguments is, how did we ever reach the present, If it stretches infinitely far back, imagine some point infinitely far back, how is it possible that we ever got here, you know what I mean? And that's the sort of resistance to actual infinities. Some people believe that you can have a potential infinity, but not an actual infinity. So for instance, Christianity has this idea that time had a beginning, but then it doesn't have an end. So you have an infinity in the future, and so the argument for that is precisely that it's a potential infinity. So basically, no matter where you are in time, you'll have never reached the infinity, right? It'll just keep on increasing forever, but no matter when you are, you're not going to be infinitely far away from the beginning of time, right? And so as a result, there won't be an actual infinity, because basically the idea is that the time that has elapsed, in the past, the stuff that's already happened is real, but the stuff that hasn't happened yet isn't, so in that sense, you don't have an actual infinity. But basically, I disagree with that because, so already I don't believe in actual infinities, of course, and to me, I kind of believe in, the sort of, what they call the B theory of time, which is that time actually just exists as a kind of block, and we just sort of advance through it, but the future already exists. I made another video where I said I believe in determinism, and if you believe in determinism, you believe that everything that will happen is already set to happen, and as a result, and that's actually what most physicists believe in, even though they also believe in infinity, which is crazy. So, that's not much of a legitimation. But, so the idea is that the future actually already exists. So, as a result, you can't really say that if time stretches out in the future forever, that's not an actual infinity. With a B theory of time perspective, well, the future already exists. So, if the time stretches out infinitely far in the future, then you actually do have an infinity, an actual infinity. And so for me, the most compelling way that I can try to explain the impossibility of infinity is through statistics. So basically the idea is that anything divided by infinity is zero. And in fact, many mathematicians will tell you that you can't actually divide by infinity precisely because infinity, isn't a thing, so you can't actually use it, so you have to instead have limit towards infinity. But basically, the main notion is that if you divide by infinity, you get zero, okay? So if you take any number, even a huge number, even these Googleplex things, Graham's number, whatever, you divide that by infinity and you get zero, okay? And so now what I want to think of is think of you, okay? So you are one, living being among many, okay? We know that. There are probably many, on other planets elsewhere in the universe. You're one living being among many. So, the chance of being you specifically is very low. But of course you had to be someone in particular, so that's, in another way, it's kind of meaningless, right? You had to be someone. But on the other hand, if there was infinity, then suddenly that becomes very different, because the chance of being you is not just very low, it's actually zero. There's literally zero chance of you being you, because you're dividing by infinity. So, as a result, then that does actually become very, very troubling. Likewise, in time, you think about the timeline of your life. Maybe you live 100 years, say. Well, if we say the universe lasts for 100 billion years, then, the chance of being within that, at some point within the century that you lived in, well, that was about 1 in a billion, right? Because you lived 100 years and there's 100 billion years of universe. So your chance of being at that time was 1 in a billion. And ignoring the fact that, there might be more life at a certain time during the universe than at others, but, assuming that there are lives, the same amount of lives all over the entire lifespan of the universe, your chance would be 1 in a billion, which is very low, but of course you have to be at some time in any case, and it would always be 1 in a billion. On the other hand, if the universe was infinite in time, either just infinite in the past or infinite in the future, or both, then it wouldn't be 100 divided by 100 billion. It would be 100 divided by infinity, and suddenly suddenly you go from a very low chance to a zero chance. There's literally zero chance that you'd actually be living now. And then I thought of also a spatial argument. Imagine you've got this infinite universe stretching out, okay? Now let's just take a random point somewhere else in the universe, right? Just anywhere, just a random place, right? And now you have to determine the distance, right, between you and that point. Maybe it's a thing, any atom in this infinite universe, and you determine the distance between you and that atom. Well, no matter what atom you take, that atom is actually, if it has an existence at all, there must be some kind of calculable finite distance between you and that atom, right? And so, if it's finite, then again, that length divided by infinity is going to be zero. See what I mean? So, as a result, no matter how incredibly far you choose your atom, that your random atom that you selected to be, no matter how incredibly far you choose it to be, it's still going to be infinitely close compared to the total size of the universe. And again, I think that, to me, this is a pretty compelling statistical argument that you just cannot actually have infinity. And so that actually makes it quite interesting, and that actually is very good news in a way, because this is a major breakthrough in understanding the world. I mean, we actually know, as a result, something that even physicists don't even realize. We know that space and time and everything that exists within them, well, they can only exist in a finite quantity. So there isn't ever going to be an infinite future. There's no infinity backwards in time, and there's no infinity in space. Which means that it's, if there's only one universe, that we don't know. There might be other universes, but there certainly isn't an infinite number of other universes. Or universe bubbles, because sometimes universe is meant to encompass everything that exists, right? So it depends on your definition, but if there's only one sort of, thing that we can be in, then we could potentially discover the entire universe. Which, I mean, in a way, okay, you could say the idea of infinity is cool because you could just go on forever, but in a way there's this sort of more satisfaction in telling yourself that, okay, we can actually, literally discover and explore and, colonize the entire universe, potentially. So obviously that would have to require superluminal travel, but nonetheless, it might be possible. We still don't know whether it's possible or not. But if it is possible, it means that we truly could just discover the entire universe. And another good thing I would say is that it means that because there's a finite amount of things, to me, basically the only bad thing in the universe, and by definition, because it's by definition what bad is, for me the only bad thing is suffering, right? Suffering is what is bad. And literally when you do something bad is because you cause suffering. And knowing that the universe is finite is actually very good news, because it means that the total amount of suffering is finite too. It means that there's never going to be an infinite amount of suffering. Neither, an infinite amount of beings who suffer, nor any being that has to suffer for an infinite amount of time. And this should, of course, come as good news to, all these people who believe in, nasty afterlife experiences, like hell and such. Well, we can know, from the moment that we say and we recognize that there is no infinity, it also means that there can't be any eternal damnation, which is really the most important thing to me. I mean, to me, that the eternal damnation concept is really, the most horrible thing imaginable. And thankfully, it's actually impossible. And of course, it means that you also can't have an infinite afterlife in heaven, right? But I think it's important to realize that this idea of an infinite afterlife wouldn't really be what you think it's like. Because, well, you have to think about how your mind works. So let's suppose that you actually, have this afterlife, then you go to heaven, and you're there for infinity. So now think about how a mind works. So, because if you think you go to heaven, you think it's still sort of you, right? The whole reason you want to go to heaven is because it's still kind of you. If you don't have a bit of your ego or the way you used to think before, then what's even the point? It wouldn't even be you in heaven at that point. So I think most people who like the idea of heaven, they want it to be them and with their own kind of thinking that they already had before. Now, if you think that you're going to be there for infinity, well, I want you to just think about memory, right? Because what makes you you is largely memories. You are largely made up of the things that you learned and the memories that you made. So, because if you're in heaven, right, I imagine you're going to be doing things in heaven, maybe you're going to be playing golf or something with all the other people in heaven. And so you're going to meet other people in heaven, and you're going to do things with them. And, well, here's the thing. If you're going to be living there for infinity, you don't really have the ability to retain the memories that you made. Even if you didn't live for infinity, let's say you live for Google Plex years, which is, it's Google to the power, it's Google to the power of Google. So it's 10 to the power 100 to the power of 10 to the power 100. Okay. So that's that's in Google, and then there's that Graham's number thing. That's just that was just an arbitrary example, but imagine that you've got a huge amount of time that isn't even infinite. Imagine just fitting in the memories, a lifetime. How many memories do you actually have at the end of your life? Not all that many, really. You maybe have a few thousand, maybe, if you're lucky. But if you have something that's just so enormously longer that you can't even write it out on paper, then what are you gonna do with those memories? Because you just can't accumulate all those memories. Even if you did have a capacity for storing them, you just wouldn't even have the time to revisit those memories. And as such, it would be the same as not having the memories. I think, to me, a large extent of who you are is memories and conditioning. And, some people think, okay, conditioning is bad, but no, well, it's not really bad per se. It's more your attachment to the conditioning that makes it bad. And so if you just have this incredibly long amount of time, you won't actually even be able to revisit the time that you had. And as such, the entire identity that you had at the beginning will be gone, unless the only things that you remember are the things from the beginning, in which case everything that happened since the beginning you've completely forgotten, which also kind of makes it meaningless and pointless. It's as if it didn't happen. You might have had already, Googleplex years in heaven, but it's as if you didn't have them because you don't actually remember anything from them. And if you did have one memory each regular interval of a huge amount of years, right? If you had one memory every Google years, well, you'd still have so much time between each memory that was forgotten. Is that really something you would want? Is that really something all that desirable? I don't really think so. And so I think these people who like this idea of heaven, they're not really thinking all that much what it would really amount to. They don't really consider the concept fully and realize that might not actually be all that wonderful. And another thing, of course, is hell. I don't think they realize quite how horrible it is to just suffer constantly for eternity. It's infinitely terrible. This is what I want you to understand. And as such, it's infinitely unjust. And that is again why I say that you can't you can't worship a God that has done this at all and still be a good person. Literally, your ideology is the most horrible thing imaginable. And as such, on a theoretical level, you are literally the most horrible person anyone could be. And I find this truly shocking, and this is why I find all these people who actually believe in a God who created hell and actually sends these people to hell, or just lets them end up in hell, or whatever, it doesn't matter, because this God is omnipotent, right? This God can do anything it wants, and yet it lets these people suffer infinitely. Well, this God is infinitely bad, and you actually support this God, which means that you're the most immoral person imaginable, okay? And as such, you're literally the fact that anybody can believe this is absolutely horrifying. And the fact that actually a majority of Earth's population believes this, or at least about half or something like that, is horrifying, okay? It's absolutely horrifying. And as such, anything that they do that's actually good is completely meaningless because they actually believe in the most horrible thing imaginable. But thankfully, we know that that's actually not possible. It could be a very, very, very long time of suffering, but it still has to be finite, and that should come as very, very good news. In fact, we could say that the amount of suffering that everyone is going to experience collectively in the entire duration of existence is still going to be infinitely small compared to infinity. So this idea that time is finite should come as very good news, because we know that no matter how bad things get, eventually it will just all be over. And so now it's sort of interesting to consider this fact that afterwards there'll just not be anything. So it's not then time will go on and there'll be nothing. It's more there will be no time, because you just can't have infinity of anything, including time. Which means that time can't stretch back infinitely in the past. So there was, a beginning to time. And you can't say that before then there was no time, because before you're using the concept of time still. You're still thinking with time. No, you can't say before time there's no time. What you can say is that, there is a beginning to the universe. There is a start to the universe, the time, there's time zero, and it starts. And before then, there's not time, there's not an emptiness that's sort of a pre-existing or anything like that. There just isn't anything at all. There's non-existence. And the thing is, we always try to visualize things, and it's just impossible to visualize non-existence. We can conceive the concept intellectually, but we can't really grasp it very well. And likewise, at the end of time, well, there's just end, and there's just nothing afterwards. And it's not going to be black or empty or anything like that. It's just going to be non-existent. It's not going to be.